Well, I was wondering about your neighbors. What's the earliest recollection you remember of neighbors? How often did you see them? Where did they live?
We had, Judy, we had very close neighbors. Just across the road was Cerny's. To the south, to the east was just across the kind of a valley was Reed's, and then to the north was Rasmussen's and Adkins that lived right close together. And
How
then
far north?
about a mile north.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, there was a family on every section, which was 640 acres. But these two families were together, and they were our best friends, especially Rasmussen's. Then on over the hill from them was Johnson's and Fry's. And Grandma Fry, which would be a generation older than my parents, she was the midwife. And
do you remember her first name? Or did everybody just call her
Sabrina Fry.
Really?
Sabrina. And she was a little tiny woman.
She delivered all the babies.
In the whole countryside. She was a midwife. And anyhow, we lived together. The Rasmussens and Adkins, Reeds and Cerny's, they called our valley the Bohemian Valley, a lot of Bohemians. Then there was Seibels, two Seibels and Lankeys and Cottricks and Olsons. And I remember old Ole Olson used to come over real often, and he chewed snuff. No, he chewed some kind, I don't know what he chewed, but Grandpa chewed Copenhagen. And every time they come over, that would be the first thing they'd do. They'd get their Copenhagen out of their pocket, and they'd pat it like that. Grandpa'd take the lid off, and Ole'd take a pinch of his, then he'd get his out of his pocket and pat it, give it to Grandpa. They did that every time they were together. But we were all, Judy, like one great big family, and on Sunday we'd all go to Sunday school.
Where?
Which was 3 or 4 miles south of our homestead. And first we went in the we just went in the old Model T. And there was, of course, lots of kids, because all the families had a big family of kids. We had a big Sunday school and church. And
Did you never go in a wagon? You always went
No, we didn't, but Enfields did. As I remembered it, they were the only ones that still had the horse and buggy. Everybody else had mostly Model Ts.
1920s?
I was born in 1920.
So your remembrance would be 24, 25.
Yeah.
I remember once you were telling me about your Christmas. What do you remember about Christmas morning?
Christmas morning, okay. We believed in Santa Claus till we was really quite old, I'd say. I don't know how old I was when I quit believing, but I kept trying to believe in Santa Claus because I didn't want to give it up. But one Christmas, we always had a Christmas tree. And one Christmas, Grandpa said, we can't afford a Christmas tree. So it was the day before Christmas, and he was outside doing the chores, and he told us kids to come out. He found something behind the barn, and there was a Christmas tree. Little old Christmas.
Got it?
He had it hid, but he was playing with us, see. And in those days, we had, what kind of, a fir tree. We had fir trees, and the minute you brought those fir trees in the house, the whole house just smelled beautiful. That was my memory of Christmas, was the smell. And then we had little candles, Judy, that we had little pinches on it that we put on the...
And a clothespin?
Kind of like a clothespin, and we'd put those candles on, and in the evening, we could light those for just 2 or 3 minutes. In the evening, we'd turn off all the kerosene lights and light those candles. And then we'd have to blow them out. And that was painful because it was so pretty. Then we had, for Christmas decorations, beside our popcorn and cranberries, we made cranberries and popcorn and construction paper, little chains. That was our decorations, and we had one gold ball and one silver ball. They was great big. I thought they was real big. But, oh, they were just precious, and we'd pack them away in a box and year after year. And then we didn't have any presents hardly, maybe some candy, maybe an orange, nuts. And one year, Grandpa come to town just the day before Christmas, and in the store they had a jar of beans, and the one that guessed the number of beans in that jar got this big, beautiful doll, great big doll.
Oh.
And Grandpa guessed the number of beans, and he'd
You're
come
kidding.
home with that doll. And it was Franny's doll, really, but it was really for all of us, but it was Franny's doll. She ended up with it. And after Grandma died, Franny was up rummaging around down here in the bale hay house, found that doll, Judy.
You're kidding. What did it look like?
Pretty dilapidated, Judy. Ugly, but she took it home. And I think she fixed it all up.
Was
But
it like a porcelain, I suppose?
And it had a cloth body, and they were ugly. Actually, those dolls were ugly, and the legs come clear down like that, see?
The cloth legs?
The cloth leg, and then they had little tiny legs and feet hooked on. And the arms were the same way. They were cloth come down with little old tiny, out of proportion. But that was the only Christmas we had was that doll.
Isn't that something?
But we didn't care. We just thought. But Grandma Spurney always sent a box, a Christmas box. And down through the years, Uncle Hank, every time he went to town, they'd have gumball machines and little things where you'd get little rings and
Trinkets,
things, trinkets. He'd save those, and he'd send them. Grandma Stafford would. Then she'd make a hoska. And then she made sausage and sent it up. How did it keep from getting spoiled, Judy? That sausage, but she'd send it through the mail.
I don't know.
And it was good, never did hurt us. We loved it. It was full of garlic. It was full of garlic. It was so good.
That's why it didn't kill you.
Yeah, and Mrs. Cerny, she made sausage just like that. All the Bohemians did. And then when we were down to Spurney's visiting Aunt Rosie, I said I would love to have that recipe. She told us how they made it, Judy. Oh, I never saw so much work in my life, how they went to work making that sausage, Judy. And they cooked this and cooked that, and what they did then, when they butchered the hog, they took the intestines, they took the intestines out of the hog, and they saved those skins, turned them, the casings, and they turned them wrong side out, and they boiled them and cleaned them. And then when they got the
Scraped them.
sausage made, then they stuffed them, and oh, the work, I can't imagine anybody going to that much work to make those sausages, but they were delicious.
Isn't that something?
And that was, that was things I remembered.
Do you remember anything about your school when you started to school?
I don't remember my first day of school. I sure don't remember that. Mostly I remember when Franny started, she was 4 years old. I can't imagine Grandma letting her go that mile to school, and we were so proud of her. And we'd go to school, take a hold of her hand, go up and down those hills, and we'd get to school. And I remember coming home one night, and we said, well, Franny only fell down 2 times today coming home. She was so little. And we spoiled her just rotten.
And she was, let's see, and you guys walked over the hill? That's that.
A
big
mile
hill
north, and we always wanted to ride a horse, and Grandpa wouldn't let us. He was afraid. He said it's warmer walking than it is riding a horse. But Adkins kids always rode their horses, and we thought the folks were mean because they wouldn't let us ride a horse.
Did you have a horse to ride?
Yeah, we always had horses we could ride, but then I don't know. We'd get to school sometimes, and our ears would be frosted, and our nose would be frosted. And it was rough.
Who was your
Yeah.
first teacher that you remember?
My first teacher, actually, was Clara Sowell. And then Vera Mahaffey and Cassie Adkins was Franny's first teacher. And Cassie would hold Franny on her lap all the time because she was little. But we had a big school.
How many average?
The highest I remembered was 28.
And that's
but-
all 8 grades?
All 8 grades. And the teacher had to go to school and build a fire. She tried to get there before the kids did to build a fire. We'd take our lunches. And we had always homemade bread. And Rasmussen's, Mrs. Rasmussen and Mom, they had this yeast that they kept going, see. And if you run out of
The
yeast,
starter, yeah.
the starter,
Well, I about went to sleep. What's the matter here?
I better let Grandpa tell you some about his school.
I just about dozed off, didn't
Well, I wanted you to tell the story about hiding those shoes up on the sand hill.
Okay.
I want to know some nitty gritty.
We were kind of ornery. Us kids were really kind of ornery, I think, now when I look back. But we had the Enfield kids that come over. There was a whole big family of them, too. And they were the last people in the county that had the horse and buggy. And they'd come over to our place on Sunday because Grandpa would give Virgil and Johnny Enfield violin lessons. Violin lessons.
Arthur or Johnny?
Arthur,
Johnny, Jake.
there wasn't any Johnny.
Johnny Enfield. I think Johnny died. I think it was.
Arthur died.
So did Johnny.
Arthur got killed in a car wreck.
Well, anyhow, Enfield kids. They come over to get their, and we'd see them coming over the hill about a mile south over there by Ole Olson's. And old John Enfield, he was mean to horses. And he'd whip those horses all the way, whip them, whip them, whip them. And then when they got to our place, us kids were so angry. We didn't know what to do. We were frustrated. We hated that family. So we took those kids up on the sand hill. They was about our age. We took them up, and we all took our shoes off to play, and we took their shoes and buried them. Got ready time to go home, and those kids didn't have any shoes. And that was pretty awful. We had to go back up there and dig until we found those shoes.
Well, it's a good thing you found them, I guess. I've been
I
up
don't-
on that sand hill. That would be kind of hard to find them.
It was a big old sand hill, but it was a fun sand hill. That's where we lived. And Grandpa wouldn't let us take the kiddies up there, but we'd sneak them up there and make houses, and play house with our kiddies. And we'd see Grandpa coming home from the field and at noon. Boy, and we'd grab those cats and we'd run down. Sometimes we wouldn't even have time to take them because he didn't want us taking the cats up there on the hill. That's kind of funny.
Wonder why. Was he afraid an owl or something would get him?
Didn't want to lose them, I guess. So. And then another time, this is bad, real sad. We had about 13 cats on the place. And Grandma had all these little chickens, and one by one something was getting them. And Grandpa said, "It's a cat." We didn't know which cat it was. And they were our livelihood, Judy, those chickens. Couldn't live without them. So they were disappearing. So one day I remember Grandpa went out and he took and killed every cat. And we had this little wagon. This is sad. This little old wagon that we had, and it was piled up with cats. Killed every cat on the place.
Did that stop it?
Yep, of course. Had to do it to save our chickens.
So you could eat them when they got to be fryers.
Yeah.
So
Oh, I
it
could.
wasn't too bad. The chicken was doomed anyway when he was hatched.
But it didn't take us long to get more cats started because everybody had cats. Cats.
Oh, great.
But we always had a house cat. I mean, we could take cats to bed with us anytime. That's one thing Grandma would let us take our cats to bed with us.
Well, they'd heat your bed up.
Keep us warm.
Yeah. Oh, I know one more story before we go to Daddy. I was wondering if you'd tell about the time that Uncle Billy got drugged through the
Oh, yeah, okay.
stubble field.
The Frys that lived a couple miles north of us, Bruce and Ted, they were a little younger than us kids were, but they had a Shetland pony. And those kids were kind of tender-footed. They weren't tough like we were. So they brought that little Shetland pony down for us kids to break for those boys. And right off the bat, let's see, Betty, we broke the horse so we could ride it. Old Mike was his name. Ornery little old Shetland pony. And Betty rode him down to the mailbox to get the mail, and she come home and fell off the horse, the Shetland pony, and her knocked her elbow out of joint, and her elbow from here was poked out clear up here. And she come in, she wasn't hurting too bad, but Grandpa said, "Got to go to the doctor." And she said, "No, I don't want to go to the doctor." And he said, "Well, I can pull it back in place if you can stand it." And she said, "Okay." So they took her in the bedroom, and he said, "You brace your feet up against the foot of the bed, and I'll pull it back in place." And I remember when it popped back in place. But it never come in good. She always had a bump there, and it always bothered her all her life. That was old Mike. That was one episode. And then Billy took Mike down to herd the turkeys in the alfalfa stubble, and he had the rope tied around his wrist and then to the saddle horn. And he went to sleep in the alfalfa stubble while the turkeys were grazing around, and the dog jumped up and scared old Mike. And he took off and pulled Billy across that alfalfa stubble, clear across that whole field. He was just a little tyke, I don't know, probably 9 years old maybe, but anyhow, when he come up to the house, his whole stomach, his shirt was gone, and his whole stomach was just like hamburger. And the folks never took him to the doctor either. And that's when I said, I think Daddy went to town and got jars of Vaseline. Grandma said he didn't, but I just really remember that he got something to put on his stomach to clean that dirt out. And then I remember him lying in bed for days. He laid in bed until that healed, and he never had a scar on his stomach. It was amazing. But we didn't go to the doctors, but we all had our real bad episodes with horses. And I remember one time when the horse kicked Betty. It kicked Betty and kicked her front teeth loose. And then another one, we had a colt, and Grandpa said, "Now don't get in the corral with that colt." And old Susie and Ferry and Bonnie and I wanted to pet that little colt. So we got in the corral with it, and the colt was on one side and the mare on the other side, and I was in the middle. And that old mare, she run over and run into me, and she stepped on me right here, and I thought I was dead. I mean, she just crushed my insides. I still got scars there. And I thought I was going to die, so I knew I was going to die. So I told Bonnie she could have my dolls. And that was my episode, yeah.
She was an Indian giver, wasn't she?
Yeah. Did you take your dolls back?
Well, I'll tell you what. Anyhow, then old Susie, Bonnie and I always had to do the dishes. And so we hated to do I don't know why Betty and Franny never had to do the dishes, because we always done all the milk, and then we had to do the dishes too. So I remember one day, every time I'd say Bonnie, Susie was mine, because I got Susie for my birthday, because Grandpa had to have a saddle horse. It happened to be my birthday, so he said, she's your birthday present. So she was mine, and every time I didn't want to do dishes, I'd give old Susie to Bonnie if she'd do the dishes. And that went, and then she'd give it back to me, and we just did that. Bartered back and forth, and finally I ended up and giving Bonnie Susie. She never would give her back to me, and I think ended up she was really Bonnie's horse. She never would give her back to me. That was.
That'll teach you.
Yep. So she was something else, but she was.
Yeah.
She actually, she was the one that thought of all the things to do, and I just went along with her.
Well, she was a little older. That makes a difference.
Yeah, just a year older.
Uh-huh. Hey, thanks. That was great. Can I get a few from him? And we'll do this again sometime.
Oh, okay, we'll
think
do
of
some.
more. All right. Let's see if I
yeah, when you get.
Okay. Well, let's see. I thought of a lot of things I wanted you to say when I was talking to Mom. But I wanted to know about your first remembrance of that Christmas down at your grandma and grandpa's down in Kansas after your mother died. Do you remember when your mom died?
Yeah.
Do you remember any of that?
Yep. I can remember
What do
when.
you remember?
Well, she was.
You were 4?
Yep, she was over in the. We lived in the bunkhouse, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And she was in bed. And I remember a doctor come out there. They couldn't get a doctor. World War I was on. And this doctor come out and said she had the flu.
Would that be that Spanish influenza?
Well, he just said she had the flu. And she stayed in bed, and she didn't get any better and any better. And finally, Adams come up. This Adams bank down here, Melvin Adams' granddad, had a bank in Lemoyne, and he had a Dodge. It would be like the forerunner of a pickup. It was a Dodge with the top that went clear to the back and had a screen on the side, you know. And anyway, they picked my mother up. I believe she was on a cot. And they carried her in and put her right in the back of that.
Kind of like a station wagon, kind of?
Well, it was like a pickup with a topper on it. And then no sides, just screened, or just chicken wire sides, see? And they had a little round oil stove. It was cold. It was in the fall of the year. Had a little round oil stove lit and put it in the back there so it helped keep it warm, you know. And I can't remember whether they had the side curtains pulled down or not, but I know I got too close to the stove and I had a coat on with these big celluloid buttons.
Oh, no.
I got one of them, you know, like that. Well, I scorched it all out of shape. But anyway, we took her to Lemoyne, 30 miles down through the hills. And then they put her on the train and took her to North Platte, and we went on the train to North Platte. And I believe we stayed in the hotel room. They took her to the hospital, and I can remember my dad coming in and saying she had died. And then I can't remember too much more because we went to Kansas, and then we stayed down there with, let's see, George and Wilcie and I stayed with Grandma and Grandpa, and Don was just a baby. And he kind of stayed with first one and then another. Back and forth, you know. Because there was Aunt Mame and Aunt Anna, and what else was there?
Aunt Lena?
Aunt Lena was in Kansas City. So we didn't stay there, but he stayed several different places around. And away we had Christmas at Grandpa and Grandpa. That was old German Christmas. And one day they had a parlor. And I come in the house and couldn't get in the parlor. And I can remember George. George was 5 years older, see, he was 9. He was trying to peek through the keyhole, see what was going on.
Yeah.
Anyway, after quite a while, why then, here come Grandma and Grandpa, and they opened the door, and there was that Christmas tree, all lit up. Where'd that come from? Santa Claus. I remember I asked Grandma, well, where's Santa Claus? Oh, he jumped out the window. And I went and looked out the window, but I never did see him, of course. Wilcie and I got a wagon. Of course, we took it out and broke it right off the back. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was a Christmas.
Well, how long did you stay with your grandpa?
Till spring. My dad didn't stay single very long after my mother was buried. Of course, you know what he was. He had this place up here. And he and a couple of hired men were batching up here. And the kids were all down to Kansas. And I didn't know anything about it, but George told me afterwards. Grandpap and Grandma Golzio were pretty unhappy. They didn't want her to leave Kansas in the first place and come up here, see. Well, and she died up here, see. And George said he can remember Grandma just giving Logue hell for killing my mother, you know. You took her up there in those sand hills and killed her. That's what you did. Well, of course, she was all broken down, you know, her daughter dying. But then it was spring, and I can remember when Logan and Grandma Cross got married, and that couldn't have been too long, because it was the next spring. And we came up, and I remember I said something to Mom. I said, what'd you think when you drove in up there? She said, I don't want to think about it. 3 guys been a batching up there. Of course, my dad would come down and...
You imagine what that would be like, because she come from a pretty nice home down there.
Oh, yeah. She lived with my great-grandmother, see, raised her. She was an orphan.
Big house.
Yep. And they had electric lights in the town, and, you know.
They were living civilized.
Yeah, and we were living uncivilized. Yeah, but she said, I don't want to think about it. But I can remember we came up, Marvin, my cousin, was working for Logue, and he came down and met us at Lemoyne at the train and picked us up in a car, see, and took us back up. I can remember that, and it was colder than hell, too, I'll tell you. Just an old open car with a cloth top. And we'd been on that train, you know, the train was warm. We got in that car and drove 30 miles up through the hills. Man, it was cold. Yep, Mom had to clean that house up.
How many rooms? 2 rooms and a kitchen?
Yeah, 2 rooms and one big bedroom, and a dining room or living room or whatever you want to call it, and then a kitchen. Kitchen was added on.
Very small dining room with a big kitchen.
Yeah.
I mean, very small front room with a big kitchen.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we slept upstairs, and the ceilings were 9 foot, you remember? So that give you a higher ceiling upstairs.
Uh-huh.
The walls were 8 foot, but actually they were 9 before the rafters started, but it was a lot of head bumping going on up there, I'll tell you.
Six
Man.
of you sleeping up there? Well,
No. Generally it'd be a couple of hired men and George and Wilcie and I. George and Wilcie and I'd probably sleep in one bed, and the hired men would sleep in the other, you know.
Was there
A
any-
fold-down bed. You couldn't get a
Oh.
big bed up there. They were those fold-down
Oh, yeah.
beds. I don't know how they ever got them up there, and they must have took them through a window outside or something. I don't know how
Was there
they...
any insulation up there? Or
Oh,
did you
no.
For heat?
Heat? Opened the door, stair door downstairs, and let the heat come up. That didn't last long.
Stove went down out during the night,
Yeah,
and it was bitter cold, just as cold in the house as it was outdoors.
yeah. Used to freeze the water in the water bucket. We'd take it into the dining room where we had a big heating stove and set it on the stove or along the side of it, but it'd be froze by morning.
Ugh.
Yeah,
That was one of the ugliest parts of the winter, was getting up in the morning and making that fire, getting the fire.
Wilcie and I did that for years.
That was your job?
Got a penny every morning when we started the fire. We got a penny. So he took one day and I took the next. We made 15 cents a month.
Well, you know, back in those days.
Oh yeah, and
that
then
was-
we'd go to school, and most of the school teachers would pay us to start the fire at the school. See, right close. So we got another penny or two or what. I think the school teachers paid a little better.
Your dad?
Yeah. I think they paid a little better. I don't remember what it was. Nickel a day or something like that.
Boy, that isn't bad at all. I suppose you had to go out and replenish the fuel during the day.
No, not necessarily.
What'd you use for fuel?
Coal, chips and coal. The district bought coal, you know.
Well, where did you attend school? Was it just right there in the same...
Right there, old District 7, sod house, had a sod schoolhouse. 22 kids when my first year of school, had 22 kids going to school there. Ruth Jensen was the teacher. And I remember old Bill Spawn, and we was talking, he said, you know, this is years later. He says, hell, she didn't know anything. And looking back at it, I think she was a poor teacher. I don't think she was. Because we had another one the next year when I was in the second grade, and she was a good teacher, you know, really put out the effort. And she kept order. She's the one that whipped old Paul Kenworthy. Scared old Bill Spawn me to death. I can remember old Bill saying, Gene, boy, you better behave. She'll flog you. She had a quirt. And old Bill, this old Paul, he was a big old kid, 15, 16 years old, and I don't know what he did to her. But we heard this ruckus, and Bill and I sat in the front, you know. Turning to look back, and she was whipping him over the head with that quirt. And he was trying to protect his head, you know, and she finally run him out. He finally got out of that desk and run, went out and got on his horse, but we could see out the window, see. And she grabbed the bridle, and she was talking to him, and every once in a while she'd shake that quirt. And finally he got off the horse and come back. She made him come back inside the schoolhouse. But she was the boss.
Yeah.
About as
How
big
would
as...
you like to teach like that?
Well, she didn't bother old Bill Spawn and I. She did me once. I kind of sassed her or something. Boy, she was redheaded, you know, and had a quick temper. Boy, she jumped on me, I'll tell you, right fast. You didn't sass her.
What was her name?
Carol Cullum, Carol Becker. I painted her ranch for her a couple of times up there after, in the 70s.
Oh, the Beckers?
Yeah, Carol Becker. She was,
Eddie Becker?
well, she was Eddie Becker's aunt by marriage. But, so I went up there, and one day she came out, and I was shingling on the shop, and she came out and said, Jake, I want to show you something. And she had a check for $6 and some cents. And she said, I've kept this all these years, and it was 1934. I think it was. I'm pretty sure it was 34. And she said, that's the last load of dry cows that we shipped to Omaha. And they lacked $6.34 of paying the freight to Omaha to get rid of them. And she said, John, that was her husband, said, we'll just let them die out here in the pasture. We're not going to dig up money to get rid of them. Now, ain't that something?
Boy, that's sad.
That's sad. You bet.
Tell you about Grandpa. I mean, we were poor, Judy. We never hardly knew if we didn't raise a garden or have the cows.
Oh, just a second, Mom.
Oh,
I'll just put it here.
talking about being hard up, and we would like Jake said, we just didn't have any money, and Grandpa would play for dances whenever he got a chance, and we would ride in the lumber wagon into town, which is 12-14 miles, and then clear on out to Spotted Horse. From town, how far would that be, Jake? And with a horse and a wagon, and then Grandpa would play the fiddle all night long. They'd play till sunup.
But the horses were strange, see? And they didn't know it was home, and they just kept on going around and around, and they finally went back. But the first thing was to get a house built, you know. And I suppose the fellows that came up, like Gents Peel came up and brought 6 or 8 milk cows with him. And I suppose he probably came up and built a little fence or something, a pasture for those milk cows. I don't know. And then,
Do you have a fence on your land?
oh, ever since I can remember we did, but I don't know when they fenced it. It wasn't fenced. There was a windmill over there in that blowout, you know, way over south next to Hawkins. Well, the reason that blowout's there is because there was a windmill there. And they put the windmill there, and then it blowed out. And then when the water came up, well, the water came up, and there's water in there. But they didn't have any when they were building their house. They didn't have any fences. They didn't have anything much to do. It's the way I got it the first 2 or 3 years. People came in and didn't have any cattle. They didn't have anything. So they
Livestock.
fenced.
Did they plant a garden or anything?
Oh, I think so. I think probably most of them, that's the first thing they did.
But I don't know how they'd get it to grow without water.
Oh, yeah. It'll grow without water. We didn't have the same seed then that you got now. They didn't need that water. Hell, we never did have water to water a garden. When we was out the company, you know, I used to water from the windmill a little, but
Yeah, Grandpa did. He piped water from the windmills out.
yeah, Mrs. Hulbert raised a big garden. Grandma Cross raised a big garden. Hell, they didn't have any irrigation.
Most people didn't.
You saved your own seed. And the corn, now they've think how in the last 50, 60 years, how many generations of corn. They got corn now that won't grow unless you do irrigate it.
Yeah, I suppose that's true.
And
See?
even during the drought, our gardens grew. Nice big gardens.
Do you remember the Dirty 30s? Where were you?
I was in California, but I come back here in 35 in the winter. And it was dry as a bone. Rained a little in the spring, we was fencing. Had dust storms and stuff like that. And then I left and it was dry every place. Man,
Tell us about riding the trains.
oh boy, that was something. I was down to Kearney, going to go to college and run out of money and run out of jobs, and so I stayed till I was broke, and then I just went down and got on a train that was going west. I was coming back to Ogallala, see? Well, it took me a couple of days because I didn't know anything about a train. And I had to come up, you know, the Union Pacific. And anyway, when we went through Ogallala, it was evening. And they was going just like a bat out of hell. I couldn't get off. They didn't stop. They just kept on a-going. And they never stopped till they got to Sydney. I guess maybe I curled up and went to sleep or something, but got to Sydney, it was way after night, see?
Jake, where were you? Inside a car or?
Yeah. Well, part of the time, some of the time I had to ride but you learn real fast. I got in a gondola once, and all that coal dust flying around, and I learned not to grab a gondola right quick.
What's gondola?
Coal car.
Oh,
Time I got out of that coal car, I was black as a nigger. And I went down someplace, I don't know. You see, you hear all these stories because by that time there was a lot of guys riding the freights looking for jobs. And everybody would tell you, you know. The word got around real fast. Well, go over here to such and such a place and you can wash up. So when I got to Sydney, it was pretty cold fall of the year, and somebody says, I know where we can sleep and get out of the cold. He said there was a building there, and the city let the transits sleep in there. It was heated.
how old were you?
18. Yeah, 18. So we went in there and curled up on the floor, you know, but it was warm. It chilly outside. Then got up the next morning, and I don't remember. I don't think I even ate any breakfast. We went out, and I got on a train, and that damn thing went west. So then I began to get smart, and I was talking to all these guys about catching these freights and stuff. Rode it into Cheyenne. I said, well, I want to go back to Nebraska. Okay. So they started telling me this and that, and hell, I didn't know any one thing from the other. But anyway, I finally got on a freight train with a bunch of other guys in a boxcar. We got in there, and I thought, well, boy, that seems to me we're going the wrong direction. Well, we was going south. Well, once you got out of the town, you had to go someplace to where it stopped so you could make a switch. So I rode it to Denver. But I was learning pretty fast, and then I said to this guy, I said, I want to go back up to Cheyenne and back over. Yeah, he's telling me all about it. He said, you get on this right here. Take you right back to Cheyenne. Even told me what time it was leaving. And so I got on there, and it was fine, and it was evening, and I curled up in the boxcar, and there's another couple of guys, young fellas, kids, and they had hauled grain in this and had tacked paper around to keep the grain from leaking out, you know. So they said, you just tear this paper off and roll up in it, and it's warm. So I did that. I rolled up in that paper and went to sleep. And I woke up the next morning, we still going north. We was north of Cheyenne. Christ. Oh, well. And we just went and went and went. and a sheep herder got on someplace, and they just would stop for a minute, and the guys would say, well, you don't want to get off here, because hell, there might not be another train for 2 days going back. Most of the guys I was talking to were from the east, you know. And I remember this one guy was from Pennsylvania, and I got kind of acquainted with him. He said he had been an interior decorator, lost his job, didn't have a penny, but he was a pretty good fella. And he told me all kinds of little smart things that he'd learned, you know. When you get off at a town, you hit the bakery about 3 o'clock in the morning, and if you're willing to work, they'll give you all kinds of bakery goods that they can't sell, day-old stuff. Hell, you go out of there with your arm loaded down.
You got some food.
And they had coffee in the bakery, see? Yeah, I remember one time walking down the street, and I had a great big sack full of goodies and a 3-pound coffee can half full of coffee. So then, you know, where do you go? You can't stay on the streets, so you go back to the railroad yards. The stock yards as a rule, you know, where they loaded the cattle and stuff. And that was what they called the jungle. So you'd go back there. But there's all kinds of little tricks.
Then what was your destination?
Well, my destination, we stopped at Helena, Montana. And we got off in there and went uptown, and of course everybody was looking for a job, reading the bulletin boards, you know. They had every cafe and every pool hall had a bulletin board in those days. Help wanted. Well, there wasn't much in there. Here come this interior decorator. He had been down, so he says, hey, Shorty, come on. He said, didn't you say you was on a ranch, raised on a ranch? Yeah. He said, they want a man to work on a ranch. And boy, we run down there 4 or 5 blocks and in this pool hall, and I told this guy there, I said, if that guy's looking for a man, yeah, he wanted a man to stack hay. I said, I can do that. So, hell, I got the job. I worked a month there. Got ready to quit, and the guy didn't have any money. So he robbed his kid's piggy bank and gave me $2 in nickels and dimes and pennies. And he says, if you'll just stay, pretty soon, he said, it'll be too cold to leave. I said, that's what I'm afraid of. I could see this. And he didn't have any money. He was broke. People were buying stuff from him. He was furnishing milk to a whole bunch of people. And hell, they couldn't pay him. But we just kept on milking the damn cows and hauling the milk up there. And they'd take it, and every once in a while somebody would have a little change in a bottle. But he wasn't making any money, I'll tell you. Anyway, I left there and got on a train, and it was headed west, so I said, well, hell, I just won't go to the West Coast. It's warm out there. So that's where I went.
Did you write to your folks?
Yeah, I wrote to them when I was in Montana, you bet. Then, of course, I didn't write because I was traveling, you know, during my luxury ride. I went to Seattle, and that was something. That was something. I mean, there were so many people out of work. Seattle was, the only welfare. Now, you can't believe this, but there wasn't any welfare like you know it now. The churches had help. The Salvation Army was the thing that we found. You could always go to the Salvation Army and get a way. They called it a meal, but it was I remember it. Generally, it was beans and a slice of bread in a little tin plate, you know, and they'd pour a lot of soup over it, but it filled your belly. And just imagine in Seattle, the line went around the block and then crossed the street.
that many people.
Big men, big lumberjacks and loggers, stuff. And it was pretty.
People really starved, Jake.
Hell yes, they starved. You bet. It was pretty bad. Guys with families, you know, guys like me, you didn't have to starve. I mean, you could. Well, in Seattle, they were Del Monte was promoting a sale, you know. They had all this out, and people would come by, and they'd give them a little spoonful of this and spoonful of that. And the guy standing there serving was getting kind of late, and he said, "Hey, kid," he said, "just stick around." He said, "I'm going to close up about 11 o'clock. Nobody coming." And then he said, "You can have all the fruit and stuff you want," because it couldn't keep it. So I had been down to the waterfront, and they'd had a hell of a fire down there. And that's where the transits moved in. They called it Hooverville. And they began to build up little shacks and stuff, you know. And I run into a Chinaman down there, just talking to him. He spoke good English. He was American Chinaman, you know. And we was just talking tough times, you know, visiting. And he had a little house built. So when I got all this fruit and vegetables or whatever it was I got, I mean, most of it was fruit. Well, here I go lugging this stuff down. And I took it down to Chinaman. Didn't have any place to go. Why? He said, "That's fine." He said, "We'll just put her over here." And he said, and then he had some, I remember, sweet potatoes. He said, we'll have a big breakfast in the morning. Did you eat? Yep, I hadn't, but I ate that fruit, that canned fruit. Well, I was full. He said, "You can sleep right there on the floor." So I slept there. It was cold. Seattle, you know, is kind of cold. Slept in his little house. Got up the next morning, we had sweet potatoes. Oh, heck, I'll tell you, we had a lot of fun.
Did he have a family?
No, he's single. But he was living.
How'd you end up in the CC camp?
Well, I went down to California, thought it was a little better down there, but it wasn't. And then I got to thinking, well, Eberspachers lived down there. So I went clear down to San Francisco. I didn't know where they were, but I found out then when I got to San Francisco that I'd gone 300 miles too far. So I turned around and come back up by train, and I eventually wound up where they were. And it was in the fall, dry, and I just got there, and the next day they had a forest fire. So George took me down there, and, you know, the ranger, let him go if he knows how to work. Well, I went out. Well, then I had to wait till I got my money. You couldn't get your money till the government paid you by the month, see? So, anyway, I stuck around. Well, stick around. I just stuck around all winter, run up a big board bill, and I remember I owed 12 dance tickets, 12 dances. The guy said, go on, dance. I kept track of it. And then the CC started, so we just put in the application, and the way the CC camp was set up, they brought the kids out of the city up into the mountains, and I went in as a local man, you know. And they were allowed so many local guys for every so many city kids. So George Eberspacher and I and a bunch of other young local fellas, we got to go in the CC camp. Ted Mundy, I can't think of all of them that went, but there's an awful bunch of them all over the country up there, went in the CCs. Well, you got $30 a month and your clothes.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I spent all summer paying my board bill back. I got her paid back, and I paid old, the guy that run the dances, Waterman. I paid him back. He said, "You sure you can spare this money?" And I said, "Yep, I went to 12 dances, Frank, and I didn't pay you. I didn't have any money, so I give him $12. pretty hard to do that, but I did it.
Oh, we're gonna have to do some more here.
Yeah, oh, we had a lot of fun anyway, you know.
Well, especially when you're looking back on it, because you don't remember what it felt like.
Yeah, I know.
But you know, when you're young, nothing phases you.
Yeah.
No. All you remember is the good.
But that community up there to Salyer and Willow Creek, I caught a ride up there. I caught several rides to get up there. And I remember this guy took me to the top of that last mountain and he said, "I'd turn off over here, kid." But he gave me his name, and I remember his name was Beeson, and I never went to see him. And he lived off down on the Klamath River, and he said, "If you can't find those people you're looking for," he said, "you come down river." He said, "Everybody knows me." And he said, we don't have any money, but he said, "There's lots of deer down there." He said, we'll eat deer and the salmon are running. He said, "We'll live on deer and salmon." And he had 7, 8 kids. He said, "You just well starve with us. Get in out of the weather." He said, "It's going to start raining. Don't be trying to live without shelter." And so, but I never saw the man again. But I mean, everybody was that way.
Hard times.
Well, hard times, and they were poor people. None of them were wealthy. Never had been. So they just helped each other.
Everybody in the same boat.
Yep.
They were like that here too.
Oh, yes.
They were a lot more like that here then than they are now.
Yes.
They made a little money